To interpret MAP correctly, we need to understand how it is constructed. MAP is constructed around a continuum of learning. A continuum of learning is simply a set of skills or knowledge that builds over time. The TEKS are also a continuum of learning. The writers of our TEKS rank the skills and knowledge necessary for understanding from the easiest to the most difficult. Then they divide up this continuum to assign certain skills to each grade level. If you had a second grade diagnostic test, for example, that was designed around the TEKS, or the learning continuum given to us by the state, the test items would be constrained to just content that relates to second grade. For a child that is functioning below grade level or above grade level, a second grade diagnostic would not tell us very much about what he can and cannot do. MAP's learning continuum draws from our state standards, as well as national curriculums like NCTM, and develops a learning continuum for the subjects by placing the learning statements in order from the easiest to the most difficult. NWEA believes that a student's current achievement level, not their age, should be the dominant consideration when grouping students for instruction. Therefore, once the learning statements were put in order of difficulty to create the learning continuum, it was not broken up by grade level. So no lines break up this continuum. In other words, MAP is not grade level specific. MAP is grade level independent. So what are the implications of this? Since it is not tied to age or grade, instead of looking for which grade level TEKS the student knows, MAP is just looking for any objective that the student knows. Because MAP is not constrained to grade level, it gives us a much broader picture of what a child knows and is able to do, regardless of age or grade. This means you will see students being asked above grade level content while they are testing. This is part of test design, and it is fine. MAP asks to find out if they know the answer. It is not that we are expecting students to know above grade level content. When it comes to MAP, we have to change our mindset. This is not like any other assessment that we give. This is not a unit test where we're asking questions about magnetism that we have covered in the last 2 weeks, and we expect students to get all the questions correct because we have taught every objective related to magnetism that will be covered on the test. MAP, on the other hand, is trying to find out what the student is ready to learn by asking questions from all over the continuum, and that is okay. It is supposed to do that. So what does a teacher do when a kindergartner is asked a question about identifying Greek and Latin roots? Nothing. Does that mean you need to stop what you're doing and teach Greek and Latin roots? Absolutely not. The student is being asked that question because of something that they got right earlier in the assessment. Change the way you look at this assessment. Just because a student is asked the question does not mean the student is expected to know that information. Our instruction is not guided by the questions we see presented on MAP. Rather, we use the results of MAP and the analysis after the test is complete to inform our instructional decisions through the lens of our grade level standards. Let's dig a little bit deeper into MAP with math as an example. Math is divided into strands, and these strands align to the reporting categories on the TEKS and on STAR. Within each strand, there are substrands, and these align to topics in our TEKS. Each substrand has its own learning continuum with content from kindergarten through 8th grade or even higher. Each of these learning continuums has content placed in order from the easiest to the hardest. The learning continuum is broken up into 10-point RIT ranges, presented here with the blue boxes. So there is a learning continuum for each substrand, under each strand, in the subject area content. Each of these blue boxes represents learning statements that many questions on the MAP test could be framed around. These learning statements can represent TEKS from many different grade levels within the same 10-point RIT band. For example, in the 181 to 190 range, there may be learning statements that align to TEKS from 1st grade all the way through 5th grade. This happens because, again, MAP is not constrained by grade level. It is independent of grade level. Students will be asked questions from all over the learning continuum, regardless of what grade level they're enrolled in. Where a student is placed on the learning continuum is where they answered about 50% of the items correct that were framed around those particular learning statements. This represents content that is not too hard and not too easy. This is based on Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. This is where optimal learning occurs in the sweet spot, where the content is just slightly out of reach. This is content that they are ready to learn. Another way to say that is instructional level. The RIT range that comes before the spot where a student is placed is where they got about 75% of the questions correct. This represents an independent level. This content would be appropriate for stations, independent work, or homework. The RIT range that comes after the spot where a student is placed is where they got about 25% of the questions correct. This represents a frustrational level. This is content that would require scaffolding for the student to comprehend. This is a visual that our department created to show parents how the adaptive item progression works. This is not an actual report that you can get from MAP. On the horizontal axis is the items on the test, and on the vertical axis is the RIT scale. Each item on the test is given a RIT score based on the level of difficulty of that item. RIT stands for Rausch unit, and that is a scale that goes from about 100 to 300 and measures the difficulty level of these items. In this example, we're looking at grade 4 math. As a student takes the MAP test, the computer will score each item. If the student answers the question correct, then the next question that student is asked will be slightly more difficult. If they answer the question incorrectly, then the next question will get easier. This is the adaptive nature of MAP. As you can see very quickly, the student is being asked very high level items. He's gone from a 214 to almost a 245. It is very likely that the items he's being asked at a 245 level are not aligned to 4th grade standards, but are 5th grade, maybe even 6th grade mathematical content. That is perfectly fine. We do not expect him to know the answer. We ask to find out if he does. If a student misses an item, the next item on the test will get a little bit easier. This adaptive nature continues until the student has answered all of the questions that are assigned to that particular content area test. Remember that these 52 items include questions from different goal strands, aligned to the reporting categories tested on STAR. So some of the variation you see here is because students may be stronger in one strand or category than another. Because MAP is not grade level dependent, a high-performing student will quickly move into questions that are from above grade level content. This is how we can accurately estimate a student's achievement, whether they are a high-performing student or a low-performing student, without having to give a high-level test, an on-level test, and a below-level test to our students. All students taking the MAP test will get about 50% of the items correct. That is the way that MAP is designed. A MAP test is not a test of mastery, and therefore it is looking for what the student is ready to learn, not looking for that 90% mastery mark. Are we expecting students to know above grade level content? No. MAP asks to find out if they know. If a student misses a question, they get an easier question. Remember, the test is not designed for students to get 100% correct. That is not the expectation. MAP is searching for the instructional level, the level at which a student gets about 50% of the items correct and 50% wrong. This level indicates what a child is ready to learn. MAP is scored on the RIT scale. RIT stands for Rausch unit. Rausch was a Danish mathematician, and this scale is named after him. The RIT scale goes from about 100, maybe a little bit below that, to about 300. The RIT scale is an equal interval scale, meaning that the difference between scores is the same, regardless if you're looking at the bottom of the scale or the top of the scale. Just like on a ruler, 1 inch is the same size no matter where that inch is along the ruler. Each item on the test is given a RIT value based on the item difficulty. The score a student receives on MAP is not based on the number of items they get right, but on the level of difficulty of items. The overall RIT is not an average of the strands. Each strand is calculated separately from each other and from the overall score. The strands are actually reported as a range in NWEA. We report the midpoint of that range in EDUGENS for clarity's sake. The overall RIT is computed based on a statistical algorithm considering the level of difficulty of each item and the student's ability. Because of the way this assessment is designed, all students will answer about 50% of the items correctly, this indicating their instructional level or what they're ready to learn next. So the score is not based on how many items the student gets correct, because all students get about the same number of items correct. Because MAP is different from other tests we give, there are some unique features that are important to understand. First of all, it is adaptable in nature, which allows us to estimate student achievement for students who are below grade level, on grade level, or above, all with one assessment. Because it's adaptive, students will probably be asked questions from above or below grade level standards. We do not expect students to know above grade level content. We simply ask to find out if they know. This test identifies what a student is ready to learn next. The goal is not to identify mastery. Every student will answer about 50% of the items correctly. And while we are watching students test, we will see students miss many questions. The expectation is not that a student gets all of the items right on this test. Where a student is placed on the learning continuum is where we begin their instruction. That is not where they have mastered the content. The RIT scale score measures growth over time. It is a consistent scale which allows us to compare progress over multiple years instead of comparing mastery to the grade level TEKS only. It is an equal interval scale, which means a 10-point jump at the high end is the same as a 10-point jump at the low end. And the score that a student receives on MAP is not based on the number of questions a student gets right, but on the level of difficulty of those correct items.